to kick things off, I couldn't think of a better guest to start with than you, Vic.
Thanks, man.
Thank you for joining me on the show.
Appreciate it. This is going to be fun. This is, we've talked about some of the things we're going to talk about for a very long time. So this is going to be a lot of fun. And I think those that are listening will get a lot of value out of this.
It was you publishing that article that we had worked on that I feel like was actually the motivator for me to say, let's do a show about that. And, that's because, as you're keenly aware, the line of work that you do and the experience that you have, most startups fail. Like, I think the Startup Genome said like 90% of startups fail.
Yeah, most startups fail. And also when you look at venture-backed startups, the failure rate, failure being defined as returning zero capital back to investors, the failure rate of Series A companies is similar to that of Series C companies. So yeah, there's clearly something wrong. I think that number is like 75% of those types of companies. So, 75, 90%, a lot of companies don't make it past year one. Intuit has a lot of data around this too, because they do a lot of work with small businesses, but this is like the norm. Businesses failing is absolutely the norm.
Yeah. And there's obviously a lot of reasons why businesses fail. I think a study that I found interesting was from CB Insights. They kind of gave a laundry list of reasons why businesses fail. But if you squish some of the categories together, you can essentially summarize the number one reason is a lack of product market fit. And I know you work with companies on revenue acceleration and a number of other sort of related areas. But just curious if you found that surprising. Does that seem sort of in line with what you've seen out there?
No, in fact, I think you were a big reason why I added a lot of depth in my process around supporting founders as it relates to product development. And I think it's clear, if it's not clear by now, it's going to become clear very quickly this year that revenue acceleration is not a one-person sport, right? It's a team sport. And I think it's going to become even more clear that it's not a go-to-market team only. It is the entire team supporting revenue acceleration. And so product market fit is a huge issue. You do a really great job of this when we chat about breaking product market fit into kind of three distinct categories. One is finding product market fit. One is maintaining product market fit. And the other is growing product market fit. So the reality is, at the end of the day, product market fit is super critical. It does not surprise me that it's the top reason. And as we try to think about how revenue and growing companies ties into that, the go-to-market motion very much relies on, do you have a value prop that is of high need in the market?
Yeah. And that's a good point. And before we go too much further, we should even have the sort of necessary discussion of what is product market fit. I kind of have some nerdy ways of talking about it that feels a little bit like inside baseball when I talk about it. How do you talk about it with founders and maybe people who either haven't heard the term or sort of don't really understand what it means?
I think at the end of the day, for us, we spend a lot of time on the go-to-market side, and so when the demand generation efforts are not working, or the demand generation efforts are working and the sales efforts aren't working, or both of those are working and the customer success efforts aren't working, you kind of see this waterfall and trickle effect down the line. And so we go to the very end. We look at customer success and we're like, are we retaining customers? Are we, from a customer perspective, what does that retention look like? We look at that. We also look at revenue retention. And if those numbers are not in the right ballpark for said business, and I'm not going to put out some generic numbers because, for us in B2B SaaS, we look at like 120% revenue retention, 90+% customer retention, but those numbers can differ depending on the type of business you're in. If those things don't exist, then we've got a problem. And so we look at it from that perspective first. And so we find founders that are highly aligned around customer, and that makes our life very easy, and we align with them and we move very quickly. And as you can imagine, there are founders who are trying to grow the top line, and they're really, for lack of a better term, negligent around the retention metrics. And that's just a very expensive business. It just ends up being a very expensive business. It's not very optimal.
like a pipeline with a hole in it.
Yeah. And so that's how we look at it from our end, but I'd love to hear how you look at it.
Yeah, obviously the classic sort of Mark Andreessen coining the term, it's being in a good market with a product that can satisfy that market. I really like the recent post from David Sachs on the SaaS business metrics that matter. I think he does a great job of breaking down sort of in financial metrics, compound monthly growth rate, net revenue retention, sort of the engagement metrics, and give some good benchmarks in there. And that's kind of the key way of how do you know you have it. Other examples that Mark gave when he first coined it was investors are pursuing you. You get press really easily. You're struggling to keep up with hiring on customer success and other roles because you're just growing so quickly. Those are all the sort of it when you have it and it when you don't. I also really like the way that the Superhuman podcast and then article that came out around sort of building a product market fit engine talked about the way that those are all lagging indicators. They're not forward looking. They're not going to, if you don't have it, those metrics don't have any detail in them about how you're going to get it. Obviously, that's sort of the whole thing that I'm focused on with UpFocus. And I just think that problem is really unique for smaller tech companies. And by smaller, I mean like less than 500 employees, because the big companies, the way they sort of solve this is they throw a lot of highly paid product people at it. They get the luxury of a lot of specialists and smart people to sort of bridge the gap. But everyone else is sort of left to fend for themselves. And hopefully you've got some good product people on your team and a little bit of luck. So yeah, that's kind of the way I think about product market fit.
I think there's a lot of nuances there, and I think we might cover some of those in the conversation today. One of the things I have found is that a lot of that press noise and VC noise that you kind of mentioned, that kind of Mark talked about, I think that is more and more becoming less signal. It's now, in the world of followers and fans and audience, really, it's not easy, but once you do have the audience, there is this like critical mass of noise you can manufacture and create. And I think that is false telling. I think a lot of companies during even the last couple of years, 2020, 2021, really thought, those with the largest followers will give me the outcomes that I want. And I don't think that panned out the way folks thought it would. But for everything else, I would agree. I think if you're finding yourself hiring for customer support and sales, I think those two places kind of feel it the most, because you just start to see this inflow of leads and really good conversations, and you start optimizing that process. I agree on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes me think that I wonder, for companies that are growing really successfully, maybe they have sort of audiences that are also growing. But just because you have a set of audiences growing does not mean that you're, not reflecting your business metrics.
Yeah. But I'm not opposed to audience. I think that's a great way to kickstart something.
Yeah, it's obviously a key part of sales and marketing. You need to have an audience, but knowing how you're actually going to convert that audience into revenue is no small trick.
We think about that a lot, actually. So we're a services business, B2B services business, and we have audience, a growing audience, and we're very mindful about how we treat this audience. And so to date, we have a very non-robust process where we simply deliver insights and we share learnings. But I think around that point of audience, I think there's a really great concept of building in public that I think can build a lot of trust with the audience. And we're doing a lot of that in terms of like documenting and sharing, not just how we think about kind of the revenue line, but when you think about your customer, right? What else makes up that customer? What other things are they interested in? Kind of a little bit more of a full-fledged persona. And I think those kinds of things can actually kind of help bring more loyalty to the brand.
That's a great point. I think when you are building in public, a key part of what you're doing is you are engaging your market, your customers, and your prospects, and pulling them in and making them part of the journey. And I think one of the reasons that you do that is obviously the transparency and the trust that sort of builds with them, but also because you want to hear what they have to say and get their reactions as you're going, as close to the time when those things are happening as possible. And I think when I try to categorize what that motion has to do with your product market fit and long-term success of your company, it's all about how do you build the muscle, the DNA, the processes, the infrastructure, and not that those things have to be super complex, but just that there needs to be something there, even if it's a nascent something, so that you have regular feedback and engagement. And then you also have the ability to do something with it. Like, it's not enough to just have people replying to your tweets and then they just sit out in the ether with you not being able to distill that or take action on it.
It's funny. So Michael Porter, the author, has a really interesting essay where he talks about the concept of like strategy for businesses, which you're talking a lot about, as you were just sharing. There's a lot of like thought that has to go into the strategy for those things. And then like the tactical execution and kind of change. And the observation he made is that most businesses opt for the execution. And so if you think about a majority of businesses failing, a majority of businesses struggling with product market fit, and a majority of businesses really focusing on execution, you can kind of start to piece together what the problems might be, especially if you don't have some rigor and thought around some of the things you mentioned, which I would bucket into strategy.
Yeah, I 100% agree. In fact, it's one of the reasons I really hate the expression "get shit done." I literally am like, I don't want to deliver shit. I don't want to just check stuff off. Yeah. I want to know that I am delivering an outcome. Melissa Perry has a great book on this around product called Escaping the Build Trap. And man, reading that book was like part therapy, because she's articulating these things that are these scenarios that I've lived through, and any product person with some tenure has gone through that, where just like you're talking about, Michael Porter sort of talking about the bias toward execution. It is this like bias towards just ship stuff, and that productivity is measured by the amount of things that you ship, the amount of features that you've built, and not about whether or not you've solved the problem.
Yeah. I think generally there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of attention around that tactical kind of area, the get shit done, operational efficiency, operational effectiveness. That's just more interesting for a variety of reasons. And people just choose the latter as opposed to really thinking through the strategy. But today we're going to talk about a number of things that founders, we came up with. That was kind of the thought behind the original essay, but we're going to kind of dig deeper into this, and I'm excited to do that.
Yeah, me too. And I think it's ultimately because problem solving is hard, and it's a different set of muscles. But it's also really fun. And so I thought one thing that's helpful is everybody is going to find themselves, if you don't have product market fit, you're probably going to fit into one of these sort of 6 buckets. And I thought it'd be fun to just kind of go down each one, talk a little bit about what is it, why is it bad, and what can you do about it. So let's start at the top, which is founder's gut. And you're just going off of founder's gut. And
founder's gut is hugely valuable. Yes. As someone who operates a lot out of my gut, we have to say, like, there is value to founder's gut, but it's a double-edged sword. And founder's gut, when relied upon for too long, right, you kind of feel the other side of that sword.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, I think a lot of this comes from the way that we've idolized certain visionary founders. Steve Jobs gets thrown in there a lot. That we feel like, oh, it's the intangible ability to just like see through what otherwise would not be knowable.
There's a lot of myths around this too, right?
Yeah.
When you think about the sheer volume of Apple, even when Jobs was there, like when he returned, I think there's these stories that get crafted, especially in the Bay Area. The San Francisco Bay Area is notorious for myths and legends and stories and whatnot. That no other outside work was done. Somebody sat in a room and envisioned the future. Maybe they were on something, but they envisioned the future, and then that's what it was. And that is often, if not almost always, not the case. I think what we should do is caveat that by saying founder gut intuition can get you so far.
Yes.
But then there's on the path to how far, it's a small percentage of the distance you have to travel to actually kind of make meaning in the world in terms of product market fit. But I think it's always good. I think it has its place, but I think we need to put it in its place so that you can do more than that. So I think Founder's Gut can get you started. It can get you launched. But if the whole process is Founder's Gut, I've never seen that work the whole way through. And I don't think any really great founder would ever say they accomplished something or found product market fit, especially in this conversation, on their own. They had a team. This is a team sport.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think the major problem that comes with the whole relying too much on Founder's Gut is this belief that you don't need to take in information. And one of the quotes that's often sort of said, which apparently is sort of misattributed, but is like Henry Ford saying, if I'd have listened to my customer, I'd have just given them faster horses. And so when you pair that with this idea of, there's somebody with like taste making Midas touch ability to just sort of envision the future, the Founder's Gut is going to be far more useful if there is a full set of information available in front of them so that, they're able to make a decision completely. And that's the part that's usually missing when you're overly relying on Founder's Gut, is you're not doing a good job of bringing in all the information, distilling it down, and making it possible to choose. There's a related one to this, which is HiPPO, highest paid person's opinion, and deciding what to do based on that. So why is this bad?
Oh my gosh, why is it not bad? I think it assumes, I have found, especially in my practice too, that founders will often put me on a pedestal, right? And so I think that can happen equally with the highest paid person. Is you look at how much you're paying them, and that equals, yes, it's correlated to value, but that's not correlated to opinion. That's a very, very different thing. And when we're collaborating with founders, we're often looking for founders who truly want to collaborate, who believe it's a team effort, who don't believe they have the answer, who don't believe we have the answer. And we can then, if founder and us can come to the table and say, we don't know the answer, then it opens up the entire team. And then really it kind of like starts the process that we want. And I think if you just rely on one person, it's one thing if that person understands all of these components of how to find, maintain, or grow product market fit. But if they don't have that, then I think it's just a derivative of Founder's Gut.
Yeah, it really is. And ultimately overcoming this, one of the most important parts of that is cultural. So, I know you mentioned looking for clients where there's already this openness. What do you do if you're a company and you're not even the highest paid person and you're realizing this is going on? How can that person start to take some steps to shift the culture?
I think it depends on the stage, and I do believe they can have impact. I think that in some cases they might only be able to go so far. So not always will they have success. Even someone in a leadership position who's trying to make change in an organization. We talk to a lot of executives who are looking to make change, and we give them some guidance on things they want to bring in. But the reality is, you can have two people saying the exact same thing, and the leader of that business unit or that business will listen to one person over the other. And so my guidance is to share the information, bring forth the data, show the learning, bring that to the table, show where errors have been made, try to be as transparent as you can. But with all the companies we've worked with, I would say sometimes it just can't happen. I think you have to give it a go. I think it's also good practice for the individual just to be like, oh, I realize that this is happening, that only the highest paid person's opinion is being heard. Let me share some data. And if you do and you can't make it work, then in your exit interview, you can share what you attempted to do and what you tried. I'm finding most people are not even sticking around these last couple of years for an exit interview. So go and make your path somewhere else. But I would say oftentimes I do not find it to be successful. I do find people leave, but I still think it's worth the investment to do the work and try to show somebody.
Yeah. I think there's a little bit of, is it an accidental scenario or the byproduct of the leadership team where, they're used to sort of being the person in control throughout their life, right? If it's the latter scenario, there's probably not a whole lot you can do about it. If it's the former scenario, then I think it really comes down to your ability to articulate business cases. This was when I was doing product and coming across difference of opinion. The only thing that really helped is the ability to frame the decision in such a way that it shifted things away from opinion, just pure speculative opinion to, trying to argue for, one position or another, or one business case or another. So that's a skill that I think learning how you can start to make lightweight business cases, present some data in there, and try to frame the discussion more. If that starts to work, if you start to see that, we're more systematically making good decisions when things are framed correctly, I think there's hope. If there's a little bit of a well, I don't care about that, here's what I know, then I think you're right. It's probably time to move on.
I think it's also okay to kind of, you talk, I agree with you on making the business case. I think it's valuable to try to get permission, try to open that door to get permission for another perspective. I'm all for asking for forgiveness, but I think when you have to read the field and you have to really understand a couple things. I think one, you have to see whether the people around you, whether it's your manager, your team, buy into that. That'll give you a kind of a good sense. But I think the other thing is also when you're looking inside of organizations, especially larger ones, there's one thing to look at the organizational structure and it's another thing to look at the political structure, which does exist in a lot of these companies. So you do have to figure out who is going to be the best path of influence if you're navigating a larger company. And we've seen that as we help clients navigate even enterprise sales processes. It's all about finding the right people in the organization who can help you navigate that when there are larger deals. And I think I would equate a complex enterprise sales to shifting culture in a business where you're trying to get folks to understand that maybe the founder's gut or maybe the highest paid person's opinion is really not the best approach here, or find context for it where it's oh, this is a good layer for this and it blends in really nicely. I don't think it's an either or.
Yeah, good observations. Speaking of complex enterprise sales, a third bucket that we often see that can sometimes lead products awry is the squeaky wheel getting the oil. And,
squeaky wheel.
I'm not going to say it's always sales who does this, but
as someone who grew up through the sales ranks, I will protect the sales profession overall. I can't protect all of us. but there are good
Yeah.
ones.
There are many great ones, many great ones. Your sales team is critical insight into the product roadmap. Um, this is more of like when the things go awry. And one of those can be just a person who's sort of going after their quota and they're just really pushing for their feature to get built because they think that's going to help them close XYZ deal that, will let them hit their quota. And that's not always the case. Sometimes it's a person in customer success who's very passionate about, we keep hearing this issue. We gotta push this through so we can stop hearing this issue. And sometimes it becomes that those squeaky wheels are the ones sort of dictating the roadmap. How have you seen this play out in negative ways? Sometimes it's really positive, like they're bringing an important insight to bear. But
yeah, so there's a pattern that you can pick up on these things, and it is a frequent pattern we see where there's just a lot of asks, and it's fair to say that they often do come from the go-to-market side in terms of sales and customer success teams needing more so that they can sell something. I find that those teams are also the ones that when they're on a call or talking with a client will, instead of saying, we don't do this, let me know when you're ready, they'll often say, we'll let you know when we have this on the roadmap, which the reality is it's probably either never going to be on the roadmap or it's far, far away. And so I think when you're thinking about, I think this is more of like a pattern recognition. Like, do we always tend to yield to this is probably kind of in line with highest paid person, because this person likely has a lot of influence, or this group has a lot of influence, right? And so that also tells you a lot about the organizational structure, where they're coming in and they've got their laundry list of ideas, or they've said, we talked to 15, 20 customers and they all want this. And that 15, 20 customers represents, well, one, unclear whether they're true customers or prospects, or two, what percentage of the overall kind of like pie do they represent? One of the things we do a lot is we try to segment every business when we're talking to them by kind of a market segmentation, and that can vary. I'll give you a couple examples. It could be like by revenue, it could be by number of employees. That's a couple examples. And then we cut it up by demand generation channel. And so when we start to kind of, what I would recommend here, I know I'm going to jump to something here, but like when I see that, my immediate sense is, okay, there's a lot of things being said, but that's in the aggregate. So how do I break up my business to understand? And this can be a little bit of a unit economics play, but in your brain, you're just basically cutting up the business by demand gen, channel, and market segment. And in this case, you might say, okay, well, this is my enterprise sales team or my enterprise customer success team talking about customers that are in the enterprise space, right? So they're doing, $1 billion plus or $500,000 plus, however you decide to define enterprise by in terms of revenue. And so then you can put it in a box and you can say, okay, well, how loud is that compared to the rest of my business? And that's something you can kind of sketch on a napkin or do in your brain. But yeah, I think it's very easy to take that noise and just look at your business in aggregate and be like, well, that apply, because we'll do that. We'll say this is coming in and it applies to the whole thing. And the reality is it's not applying to the whole thing.
Yeah, that's a really great framework for just kind of starting to think about where is this need coming from and how does it apply to the whole business? Because I think oftentimes people misunderstand prioritization as like it's a stack rank list, when really the first level of it is budgeting. How much of your resources are you going to apply to different segments of your customers? And the big discipline for making sure like a squeaky wheel is an effective signal source and not a tail wagging the dog is to do some of that isolation. A thing that I also found is it's really hard to show trade-off decisions at the rate at which new possible decisions come up. So if you've built a roadmap, you've spent a lot of time on it, and then the very next day somebody went to a sales call or had a customer support ticket come in, and all of a sudden the ability to sort of connect the dots for the enterprise on, well, why aren't we working on XYZ, becomes really hard. And so this is where, again, I think having really effective systems that allow you to sort of stay on top of this feedback and then to reflect back what the trade-off decisions are is the key. And I have seen firsthand, the level of effort that it takes to stay on top of that. And I think when you have an under-resourced product team, if you don't have some sort of a streamlined system, it's nearly impossible. But I always tried to have a philosophy of say no by saying yes, which is, if you can come up with a really good system for being able to show the trade-offs, then you can simply reflect back to everybody, okay, so what is the thing we would displace? And it has to be articulated again in sort of business value terms, because if it's just features, and you have a feature backlog, well, what should we do this feature versus this feature? Then there's no context for what business value do we get if we're trying to do one of those two things, and it turns into this discussion where we're trying to ferret that out in the moment.
Yeah, that's totally fair. You've also done a really great job in the past, and I know this is has led a lot of the work that you did in the past led to UpFocus around even allowing you to kind of not even compare, but build frameworks to think through some of these things. And one of the ones that comes kind of most clear in my mind is really around thinking through, because Squeaky Wheel is often about product feedback, right? Or feature feedback or something that you need to include. And so you've done a really good job often in the past of taking a set of features and comparing it or aligning it with some level of assumed revenue. And so that also becomes almost like it's almost like you're saying, great, be our squeaky wheel, but now you have a place to kind of funnel it or filter it through so that you can see, okay, we know a lot of people are saying this internally, or one person is saying this internally, or one team is saying this, a lot of this, but when we put it through this system, we actually find that one thing isn't going to move the needle as much as we think. And I think that becomes a really great conversation internally to say, okay, you're saying this, but did you know this? And it's like, okay, because if you don't, I think Squeaky Wheel often comes from the fact that someone's in market, they're not able to sell something or expand revenue for some reason. They're hearing X, Y, and Z, but X, Y, and Z is really not the thing they need, but they don't know how to reframe that conversation. And that's another place that I think having frameworks that allow you to have the conversation about what's important and what's on the roadmap and why. Because the flip can be true too, right? That you can have a bunch of features on a product roadmap. And I mean, trust me, I've witnessed firsthand product teams investing, hundreds of thousands up to $1 million on a feature that, over a course of 12 to 14 months generated maybe 25 to 50K in total revenue. So yeah.
A loss. Yeah. In fact, interestingly, depending on the sort of study you look at, something like 70% of our R&D projects fail to produce as much revenue as the cost of the people's salaries that it took to produce them. So you can also understand why sometimes there can be some intolerance for I don't understand why we're not doing this thing that I can see some clear evidence for. And that's why my constant bailiwick here is you have to reframe things into business cases. If you don't have some ability to articulate, as you said, it's not about this feature versus that feature. And if you get into that discussion, you're just setting the organization up for failure. It's not even your own personal agenda loss. It's that it's just not good for the organization. And so if you, as you said, take these set of features and then connect them to a potential business value and level of effort, and then compare that against some other opportunities, then as new feedback comes in, you can kind of easily start to slot that toward, oh, that's related to this business case. Oh, that adds to the evidence for this business case. Um, and flipping that dynamic, I think, just really changes the nature of conversation internally so that squeaky wheels then actually become like the super valuable source of evidence gathering rather than a constant roadmap disruption.
Totally.
All right, now one of my personal favorites, um, made this whole name up, but call it thin decision, which is, you haven't decided, and so now you've just spread all of your resources really thin. So instead of making some bets, concentrating resources um, to really deliver value, you just let's do it all, and then essentially do nothing.
This is always bad. I don't. There's got to be. I know I've read a lot about this, but I'm sure there's scientific evidence around focus delivering value. I think we've even seen this in like the public markets when you think about diversifying your portfolio. There's like a lot of cases to be made that you shouldn't diversify your portfolio. I think that doing a lot happens over time as you grow and scale. But when you're first starting out, it's super important to get as narrow and as tight as you possibly can, and then let things expand from there. We faced this in our own business. We had a lot of people that were interested in a lot of different things from us from a time perspective. So we had chunked them into a few areas. We had chunked them into office hours. We had chunked them into a course. We had chunked them into kind of our traditional consulting. We had broke it out into like day rates, and the ability to do, even for a service business, to do all those things really, really well is incredibly hard. And I will tell you, we saw a direct correlation between cutting everything out and focusing on kind of our core business, which is strategy consulting. We saw a direct correlation between the time we made that decision and the growth in our business. And so this one is an easy one for me to help people understand. And in fact, when we do work with clients, oftentimes, a lot of consulting firms will give you like a 80 to 100-page deck of all the things that you could go do, most of which after like a month are like obsolete because the landscape has changed and the market dynamics have changed and your business has changed. We tend to focus on like 3. It's very rare that you get more than 3 or 4 actionable recommendations on things you should go focus on. And we spend a lot of time with founders talking about getting one thing done before you move to the next. So I think it's our nature. We're these beings that want to constantly grow and expand. And so you can do that. If you do it too quickly and spread yourself too thin, that creates a lot of problems. And then internally, it creates problems for your team because they don't know like what people are aligned around, and that can create some other issues. And it totally demoralizes the team because you just don't know, like things just don't work the same. Like your business won't grow, and the only way people get more opportunity and are excited about your business is if it's growing.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we hear this in lots of colloquial ways, boiling the ocean, when you're trying to do too much, or, lots of discussion out there around the power of saying no. And if you're saying yes to everything, then you're not really prioritizing your efforts. And just because we have to talk about Steve Jobs again, the great example of when he returned to Apple, he killed 70% of their projects and put all of the resources on their best 30% projects to make sure that those projects really succeeded. And that's a company that at the time had quite a bit of resources. And I think you're right. I think there's almost this like ego that goes into, oh, we're going to be doing more and more and expanding and expanding. And really the discipline is, how do you make sure that you are concentrating your resources on the things that are most likely to deliver value so that you're giving them the best chance to succeed, because most of our projects fail.
I will tell you. So internally, between me and my co-founder, we had a lot of conversations around this year being the year that it's going to be boring. And I know focus is boring. it doesn't sound sexy or interesting at all. And the reality is, our business, our tempo, our pace, everything is going better. We're feeling better. And we literally come in and do the same things every single week. And we're focused on the thing that's most important. And there's a lot to do just in that one area. Like, I think once you boil it down to kind of the thing, you find out that there's a lot to actually do. And I wonder how much of this thin decision comes from just avoidance of the things that you're just like, I can move on to this and then build this and then go there. And the reality is the best products in the world have been created through depth.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right.
And the best offerings.
Some of this happens also because of our, obsession with agile and going fast, move that fast and break things. But again, I think a lot of these things get taken out of context. And a sort of counterpoint to that that's been very influential in the way that we've built up Focus to be, a product automation workflow is the book from Basecamp, Shape Up. And thing that we really liked about that was this concept of betting. And it was, instead of, here's what we're going to do in a 2-week sprint, it's here's what we're going to do over a 6-week period. And we're going to dedicate this team to go after it. And we're going to give them a lot of good high-level direction to know, the outcome that they're trying to achieve, and then give them, just enough guidance to make them successful and to provide constraints, but then to really let them go after hitting that. And I just think that type of thinking can be a good way to reset if you find yourself in this sort of iterative agile cycle. How do you instead start to choose fewer projects, give yourself not a 6 weeks is not that long, but it's long enough to make something meaningful compared to 2 weeks, which is enough to sort of make the first wave of something.
We're talking about time. We spend a lot of time thinking about productivity and effectiveness and efficiency. And I would tell you, I think the people who can think through kind of like longer spans, like 6 weeks, which isn't long, you're right, but it can feel like a long time, or even 12 weeks. I think they've done the work of, when you have done the work of saying, I'm going to do something and it's going to take me an hour. And the first time you do that, you realize, whoops, an hour wasn't enough. And then you're like, okay, I'll do it over the course of an hour over 2-3 weeks. And then that isn't enough. I think it's one thing if you keep going. It's another thing, though, if you actually pause to reflect and say, wait a minute, next time I do this project or this task, I should actually allocate 2 hours to this. And I think that kind of work is often not done. And when you don't do it, you don't get better, you don't get smarter. And so I think a lot of this thinking around this thin decision really has to do with, okay, let's think through what is the depth that it's going to take. Let's think through how long it's going to take. And who's saying that it needs to be done in a week or two? Like, no one's saying that. You might be reading about it, but no one is saying you must do it in this much time. You have to tell the world and your team and others and yourself how long it's going to take. And I think that comes with practice.
Yeah, I like that. In fact, one of the things I did when we first started breaking down this concept, of a 6-week bet, and then looking at the number of weeks there are, it starts to really boil down for you in a year. Here's how many projects we can take on. So whenever you get started, your estimates are going to be wrong. The amount of time that you're going to go after something is going to take probably longer than you estimate. And your ability to provide yourself with good constraints to keep the scope of that thing tight is not going to be good. But you have to constantly do that practice and pay attention to it, because it'll really start to put you in touch with, okay, here's the number of bets I can truly make. So now my mindfulness of when I am allocating resources towards something goes up, and we don't do the thin decision, say yes to everything.
That's a good one. That's a meaty one.
Yeah, it is. And I think a lot of times we also do it because we're either afraid of conflict. We don't want to tell people no. We want to be a people pleaser. And then I also think it's a lack of confidence that if we spend our time on that, are we going to pull this off? It's just a mental reminder that if you say yes to everything, you are guaranteed you're not going to pull it off. So you, again, make some good business cases, then you'll feel more confident in what your decision is.
We're also Justin, like we're in such a fast-paced world, and everybody wants to move at the speed of Twitter or at the
Yeah.
speed of the feed. And so it takes, I think it takes some rigor and some thoughtfulness around, hey, how am I going to come in and commit to things? And it takes a manner of building small habits that can compound over time. So I don't want the listener here to think that, oh, you can go do it everything at once. I mean, you can, but you have to remember, one, you have to commit. You have to make a decision to operating that way, and two, you have to take it in bite-sized chunks. To use a fitness analogy, to go from 0 to fully healthy is not going to happen by you taking big chunks out of that pie. But if you work out 5 minutes a day, 3 minutes a day, right? Just a little bit. You do 10 push-ups a day, just a little bit. You eat one less kind of sugary snack or one less this. Like, that's the small stuff that adds up over time. And I think the same thing applies here when you're looking in terms of your workflow and your business and your team. Take it in small chunks and then build it. Much easier with smaller teams to do it in bigger chunks. But in large organizations, I think it's smaller chunks for sure because it's a culture shift.
Yep. Yeah. So let's talk about our fifth bucket. Shiny object syndrome. And, this is that I just got back from XYZ conference and, we need to be in machine learning and I don't know why, I don't know how, but we got to be there. Or how are we going to capitalize on blockchain? And not to say
my pitch now has to have Web3 in it.
That's right. These are, disruptive technologies are important to pay attention to because you don't want to be the last buggy whip maker. But they can also really make sure that you don't complete projects and get into thin decision. So
I'm curious from your perspective, because I know in the process of building up Focus, you have talked to a lot of people. You've gotten a lot of feedback on this. And so I'm curious for you, what you're hearing the market say around this particular one, around shiny object syndrome, because we as humans are all about like the newest thing. And when it comes to like product, when you see a feature one place and then you see it replicated everywhere else, that seems really cool. And right now, I'll tell you, I don't know if you see this, but I see like new calendar apps popping up everywhere. Yeah. Like that seems to be like the new right at this moment in time, the beginning of 2021. But I'm curious like what you're hearing around this in terms of some of the implications of shiny object syndrome.
Yeah, shiny object syndrome, what I've seen is it's typically problematic for your company when people in your organization don't know how they provide feedback and then how that feedback ultimately contributes to the roadmap. And it can't be something where it goes into a black box and then maybe one day pops out. You really need to be able to show them how you are listening and then how that is being considered alongside everything else. And so, we were very intentional at UpFocus calling things that first come in suggestions, because that's what they are to get started, and then what you're trying to do over time is help the organization understand that multiple suggestions lead to a theme, and it's themes that we really start to care about. This is clearly when a pattern is emerging out of the feedback. And then we'd like to take themes and turn those into business cases so that we can then say, for the first time, we're starting to describe what the solution is, summarize the problem statement, articulate its potential value and effort. And so then when people see that that's how a bill becomes a law, it helps them understand now when I'm coming back from that conference and excited, you can be excitedly taking down their thoughts and then showing them progress as it moves, through to something that we might take action on. And I think that seeing that there's a framework for that, and one that you also can believe in, and doesn't just feel like I submitted something to a Google form and then it went into some Google spreadsheet that I don't see anymore, and then I don't know when it pops out one day, or it's buried in the backlog. That's too hidden. You have to have something where it brings them along. That's what I've seen is the only thing that kind of really helps cure some of that shiny object syndrome.
Yeah, I think it's all in moderation. There's no lack of new things. We are in, by default, we're in a world that's very enterprising. And so we're hoping that there's always new and better. I don't think I've ever found for what we're talking about, like the silver bullet. I don't think anyone can claim to have the silver bullet, but there's definitely things you can loop in. And when you're thinking about kind of shiny object syndrome, there's a number of ways to play in that space. I think one, you can find a way to tangentially be related to it. So you're connected to it at the beginning. And so kind of easing your way in until you figure out like where it can best fit. The other thing also is you have customers and you have to figure out whether your customers and this new shiny object are going to have an intersection point. Right. We know, like for you mentioned blockchain, like we know, for instance, even in our services business, that blockchain can play a role. We're not going to go and do it today. Right. Even when we went and tested in the market, like how many of our clients are willing to pay by crypto, it's so small. It's not a very large group of people that want to be able to do that. And so we know we're watching it, we're understanding it, we're playing in it, we're dabbling in the right groups. We will even have some clients that are in the space, but we don't have to jump in head first yet, mostly because it would lead us to thin decision, which is now we've got too much going on. We're focused on our core offering, and as that expands, we will expand. And so I think what I would tell folks who get excited about things is go play in that space, go learn in that space, spend a fraction of your time, 10%, 20% in that space. But if you get too many of those, your time is going to be taken up by an entirely new set of shiny objects. And then you won't even have room for newer shiny objects. So keep it contained and find a good spot for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the thing is ultimately there has to be some kind of outlet. Like a bad outcome is that the reaction you have when people are excited about new things is there's no place for that energy to go. And that's when I think it starts to create this like obsession on, fine, I'm just going to like ram it through. And so, having a way that it's like, okay, here's how we're going to, start processing that, or, to your point, hey, let's take maybe some of our, if you're lucky, 20% time, maybe you have something less than that to sort of do some exploration. And I think having some little ways that energy can get out is good. Otherwise you'll end up just kind of forcing it to become a bigger force. There's another form of this. This is our sixth category, which is, competitor copy catch up. And this is one where you can feel when you're in the marketplace, whether you're sales or marketing, or even sometimes customer success, hey, so-and-so has this feature, we should too. And that can create a lot of disruption in your ability to hit product market fit. I know you've seen this many times and probably experienced it yourself.
Oh yeah. I mean, in our venture world, right, you'll always hear this question of if someone raised $100 million out of the Bay Area and was going to do the exact same thing you did, like, what would you do? Look, and you'll see time and time again, you'll see different things. I think when it comes to competitor copy catch up, I think this really, you talked about confidence. I think it stems from that. I think it stems from not having done the work and thinking through who your customer is and what they need. And you in your world, you're helping with a lot of surveying, right? On like a steady stream. So it's just like never stopping, and companies can really kind of understand what's going on in the market. But we've spent a lot of time doing various types of surveys around product research methodologies, right? A lot of different surveys around that. And I think people just haven't done the work. And I will also tell you that it is very common to see someone talk to one or two customers and then extrapolate that, see what the market is doing and say, oh, we've got to do that. We just heard that over here. And that was like, that goes back to maybe highest paid person's opinion or founder gut. I'm not sure, but it's very easy to come back and say that. And I don't think it's always bad. I think it's most of the time bad. But I think like anything else, when you see this competitor feature or something in the market that you must have, sometimes you have to have it because consumer behavior has changed, right? The way your users are doing things has changed. So you want to add that in. And I think you would probably bucket that under like maybe a related job of some kind, not the core thing. And so I think it just goes to like fleshing out what it is that you do at a core level around job to be done. And then what are the kind of ancillary jobs that also need to happen. And then are you missing something? But to go straight up and be like, oh, we need to go do this other thing. Well, that might not be core to your value prop. It might not be core to how you culturally operate. So I think it just comes down to maybe not having thought through what you really want to do. In some cases, it's the right thing, but I think more often than not, it's the wrong thing.
Yeah. This is one I know I've learned from you on in the ways that you've put together the sort of positioning playbook for customers. I love seeing the sort of diagrams that you put together to kind of help articulate is this prospect that I'm talking to, are they our customer type? And of course, before you build that, you really have to work with companies to understand how are they positioned in the marketplace? Who is their ideal customer? What is it that we're doing that we're, sort of going after this segment of the market, and what do we need to do that? And if you have that, it kind of works like a filter. So you don't want to turn off the drip of news that you hear about things that competitors are doing, because as you said, sometimes those become the new basic expectations for your customer. But you need to be able to understand, is this something that my customer needs given the market segment that we're going after and how we're trying to solve their unique needs, or is this something that is another segment of the market that we don't serve? And I think you're 100% right that when you haven't done that work, that's when it causes panic. That's when it causes this like irrational, we just have to have all the things. And then now you just found yourself in another sort of thin decision moment, driven instead by sort of competitor obsession.
And it's the worst in investor meetings or board meetings, right? Because if you aren't clear on what you're doing and you're waffling, someone in the room is going to say, well, so-and-so is doing this. And if you don't have your perspective, then it's going to be bad. So yeah, I think this boils down to preparation and kind of the core elements of thinking through your strategy, who you are, what you represent, who your customer is. Yeah, this can get you wrapped around the axle pretty fast.
Yeah, completely agree. Well, this has been a really great conversation about product market fit, some of the different challenges that might be happening in your organization that are preventing you from getting there. And hopefully we've shared some thoughts that will help the listeners think about ways they can sort of overcome those challenges. But I know we're not going to have covered everything. So I'm certainly excited to hear people's feedback, questions. What things did we gloss over? Maybe we said we were going to provide some insights on something, but we didn't get to enough actionable things. Or what things could we go into more detail on? Any parting thoughts from you?
Well, one, I think every single one of these 6 could be its own podcast. And I think it would be interesting to get people who spend a lot of time fighting some of these things. I think that's my first thought. My second thing is, a lot of this discussion we had today is really around awareness. So I would just leave everyone with the question, do any of these personas, do any of these elements that we talked about today that are creating this like product market shitstorm, product market fitstorm that we talk about, are any occurring in your business? Are any occurring like within you? I think that's the best place to start, and at least then you know like what you might be, you know, what friction you're working against. So that's what I would leave everyone to think about is which one of these, you know, best represents maybe the situation you're facing today.
Yeah. Well, Vic, thank you again for joining me, and I know I'm looking forward to doing some more of these with you.
Oh, it'd be so much fun. Thanks so much, Justin.
All right.